We're going to talk about Vancouver. Vancouver has, 10 cities, and there was an attempt this past weekend, recently, to remove one such tent city. What happened there, Hannah?
Yeah, so in BC, they tried to remove the fourth largest encampment or tent city in Vancouver. And there was actually a number of protesters, I think, out of town that came in to protest the removal of about 80 tents. And two of those protesters were arrested for assaulting the police. But the city cites increased fires, increased risk to public safety with all of these tents on sidewalks in front of businesses. People can't even access businesses or continue their normal life. And I think it's interesting also in Burnaby, in one other city in BC, they're considering banning public consumption of drugs. It's funny, like they've just legalized hard drugs in BC, but then they're realizing that they have a very overwhelming situation on their hands of public safety issues. So they're considering, just like you can't drink in public, banning the consumption of drugs in public. So you can go use at a designated facility, but not in public. And it's just a basic thing. People can't be walking through all these needles, through these fires. If you want to use these drugs, go ahead, but you can't do it in public. It's just a risk to public safety, and businesses are closing as a result of moving out of these areas because it's too unsafe for people to come.
Yeah, it's a good point. We see in Portland, there's issues in Seattle that there are, and I think this really escalated during COVID, where people just did things, and there were a lot of protests. We had the George Floyd protest, we had the BLM protest. There were a lot of protests happening, and things just sort of happened, and everybody was really concerned about COVID and numbers and deaths. So a lot of these encampments or these tent cities started. In Vancouver, this has been a perennial problem, and this hasn't been the first time. I remember even in the city of Toronto, when tent cities were removed, there seems to be a big public divide. On one hand, you have people suggesting that, well, it's a public space, so shouldn't anybody access it if they'd like to? On the other hand, as you mentioned, Hannah, it's a concern over safety. Does one's right to access public space overrule safety here, Brock?
I think the real issue is safety. The reason they went in was they have no access to the fire hydrants on these streets. There's been several fires in the downtown east side in Vancouver where businesses have burnt to the ground, buildings have been destroyed, people have died in these SRO housing units because you can't get the fires out. Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader federally, called the neighborhood hell on earth a few months ago. The mayor of Vancouver, Ken Sim, disagreed with him, and now he's actually taken action, probably the first mayor since Tom Terrific Campbell and half a century ago when he marched the police forces right into the neighborhood. Trying to fix this thing. And this is the result of closing the mental hospitals under the social credit government and not having the supports in place. And I think the problem's spreading. And unless you nip it in the bud, the problem's going to keep getting worse. And the downtown east side's by far Vancouver's worst neighborhood. It's spreading to Granville Street, it's spreading to other parts of the city. People who live 20 blocks away can't take their dog to the dog park because homeless people are setting off bear banger firecrackers in the park in the middle of the day. And this is what you need. You need a mayor to step up. And I didn't think Ken Sim was going to do it, but good on him for trying to clean up this neighborhood. And after that, they need to put in the correct supports to help these people and not just throw money after money trying to fix a neighborhood that's been a mess for half a century.
So let me come back to you then on that. So what are the correct supports? What kind of supports do you think need to exist so that folks don't live in a tent city? And what is the alternative to that? I mean, Vancouver has a very expensive housing market.
The alternative is you start to provide them mental health support, you provide them addiction support so that you can wean people off drugs and help them get back on their feet and be functioning members of society. It's an expensive city, whether you're homeless or not. The housing problem in Vancouver isn't for homeless people, it's for middle class people that can't afford a rent. There's maybe 1,000, 2,000 people that are homeless, which is an incredibly high number, but I think the problem is that the city's struggling with housing across the board. That's one problem. The problem of lawlessness and drug use in the downtown east side is a separate problem, and all these social agencies have done a terrible job helping these people.
So Hannah, do you see any, like this is one removal of one tent city, and I think it was very clear in the article, the persons who were removed said, you know what, we're just gonna have another tent city elsewhere. Is this Band-Aiding the problem?
It is. It's a step in the right direction. However, like Brock said, the lawlessness and drug use, that has to be dealt with, right? Because you can put someone into a home, right? But if they're still on drugs, if they're still continuing this lifestyle, they're just going to invite all their druggies over and have their big parties there and make the trash the place. That we see that with so much affordable housing. These people have to be sent into care, and the choice is you can either get off drugs, or if you're committing crimes, you can go to jail. Okay, you can't keep doing this in public. In order to be a functioning member of society, you have to take responsibility for your actions, and you cannot be impeding law-abiding citizens and families and business owners, people who are contributing to society and making life dangerous for them.